A big part of understanding written communication involves understanding rhetoric. Rhetoric's kind of a scary term. It's often used derisively or negatively to talk about how things might just be untrue. Oh, it's just rhetoric. In reality, rhetoric is just a part of language, something that all language participates in. Everything is rhetorical. So what exactly is rhetoric? Let's have a look. This definition comes from Aristotle. Aristotle, of course, is the great ancient philosopher, the student of Plato and the teacher of Alexander the Great. In his book on rhetoric, he says, rhetoric may be defined as the faculty of observing, in any given case, the available means of persuasion. Rhetoric we look upon as the power of observing the means of persuasion on almost any subject presented to us. Any subject is rhetorical, not just writing. Any use of language is rhetorical. Of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word, there are three kinds. The first kind depends on the personal character of the speaker, the second on putting the audience into a certain frame of mind, and the third on proof or apparent proof provided by the words of the speech itself. This, of course, is the famous three divisions of rhetoric: ethos, pathos, and logos. These are terms you've probably heard before, but they bear repeating and bears unpacking a little bit. First, ethos. Again from Aristotle, persuasion is achieved by the speaker's personal character when the speech is so spoken as to make us think him credible. We believe good men more fully and more readily than others. The speaker's character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion he possesses. Here's an image from an illustrated guide to writing on ethos. The character is thinking about what it means to be credible. Ethos is the credibility that a speaker or writer brings to the subject that he or she is communicating about. Ethos is an essential part of rhetoric. It helps us better understand who's speaking, why they're speaking, and find them trustworthy, whether or not we should believe this character, this person who's speaking, if they're trustworthy or not. Second, pathos, again from Aristotle. Persuasion may come through the hearers when the speech stirs their emotions. Our judgments when we are pleased and friendly are not the same as when we are pained and hostile. This is pretty simple, right? If you're upset about something, if you're frustrated by something, you're less likely to be convinced by something. But you are more likely to take action if somebody's made you angry or somebody's made you afraid. Pathos is one of the key ways that people motivate entire groups of people through speech, riling up anger, riling up fear. We see this happen all the time in political rhetoric. Third is logos. Persuasion is effected through the speech itself when we have proved a truth or an apparent truth by means of the persuasive argument suitable to the case in question. This comes down to logic. Logos is the root of logic. We're talking about persuasion through argumentation, thinking about the ways that constructions of arguments can work together to make a more persuasive point. This is what we call reasoning with someone. When you tell someone the reasons why you believe certain things. This too is an essential part of rhetoric. It's not just about trying to convince people to do things through fear. It's not just trying to stand on one's own credibility. It's also relying on this shared piece of information that is reasonability, things that we can all agree to. As long as we have a rationality behind us, we can say, I see the reason for that. This is an important tool of rhetoric. Now that we know what rhetoric is, we can get a better handle on this other term that's really important for us, rhetorical situations. Every text is going to have a rhetorical situation. This is the situation that they are presented to communicate to, why they're being asked to write, who they're being asked to write to, and how they're being asked to write. We often represent this rhetorical situation in the form of a rhetorical triangle. Three parts that are connected to each other and rely on one another. The first is the purpose, second, the audience, and the third, genre. Let's take these one at a time. The purpose of the text is the ultimate goal of your text. This is often phrased in a simple verb, so something like to persuade or to inform, to prove, to demonstrate, to explore, or question, all sorts of things we can put in the purpose here. There's a different purpose for every kind of writing, and many purposes can be used across different genres. The real thing we're after here is what motivates your desire to engage this topic. Why are you writing this paper? What do you hope to accomplish with this paper? Second is audience. Who do you think ought to read this paper? Who is this for? What pre-existing knowledge can you expect them to have? and what needs to be defined for them. Do they have some sort of background in this area? Have they read up on it? Are they familiar with the topic that you're writing about? These are all important questions to ask. What sorts of information or sources will they find compelling? Different readers, different hearers will find different things compelling. Others will not find certain sources very useful. This happens a lot of times when we start thinking about biases. This also happens a lot of times when we're thinking about uses of deeply held beliefs. Some people, for example, will never find the Bible as an appropriate source. Others will find it as the only appropriate source. You have to know who your audience is to best give them the information that will be persuasive to them. You might also think about the kinds of language these readers would expect to hear, what they would find engaging or alienating. Some readers will like colloquialisms. They'll like a more laid-back style. Others will require something far more formal. It depends on who your readers are. We might also think of audience as the concerns of an ongoing critical dialogue. There are other people who are talking about this. This is a conversation that has been going on for a while, and other things have been said about it already. You are now entering into this conversation. Know your audience. Know what they've been talking about. Who has been writing about the same topic? What have they covered? What has been left out or overlooked in the analysis of the topic so far? As you read through these other sources and these other ideas, what is it that everyone has missed? What perspective do you have that hasn't been shared yet? What is your intervention to this conversation? These are all questions wrapped up in who your audience is. The third related feature of the rhetorical triangle is genre. Genre is maybe the most complex idea that we're going to get at here, but it's also one of the most important. Let's have a look at a simple definition. Genre is a set of standardized conventions, structures, styles, rhetorical tactics employed to bring about a specific desired effect in a particular audience. So you can see already that genre is related to audience and to purpose, the effect it wants to bring out for a particular audience. This is from the dictionary. Genre, noun, a category of artistic composition, as in music or literature, characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. I like this bit. Origin, from the early 19th century French, literally a kind. You guys know this one, right? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. This is where genre comes from. It is a genus. It's a kind of categorization, how we assemble things that are similar or like along with each other. Genre is comprised of a set of specific conventions, or tropes sometimes called, standardized uses of character, or of language, or of setting, or of structure. Genre is a prerequisite of all writing. There is no writing that does not fall into a kind of genre. Imagine, for example, a situation. You get a bad grade on a test. You're going to send an email to the professor. Think of the language you'll use in that email. You're going to send a text message to your mom. Think of the language you use in that text message. These are two different genres of writing with two different audiences and two different purposes. All of those things will dictate how the language is being used to best carry across your points. It is directed towards a specific audience. Different audiences require different genres. There's a way of meeting an audience's expectation. This is key. We write in a genre because we understand the audience will expect things as soon as they're introduced to that genre. But one step beyond that, it is also a way of challenging an audience's expectations. We set up the expectation and we meet it for them in a way that maybe they weren't expecting. This is how surprises come, or turns come, as we're exploring a text. This is a quote from Frederick Jameson from his book, The Political Unconscious. He says, genres are essentially literary institutions or social contracts between a writer and a specific public, whose function it is to specify the proper use of particular cultural artifact. The speech acts of daily life are themselves marked by indications and signals, which ensure their appropriate reception. With the emergence of writing, perceptual signals must be replaced by conventions if the text in question is not to be abandoned to a drifting multiplicity of uses. Let's see an example of this, especially how genre works in relation to expectation and failed expectation. One genre we encounter very frequently is the genre of movie trailers. A movie trailer will tell you everything you need to know about a movie. When you think about what expectation is, you don't get much closer than what a movie trailer will give you. Look, this tells you exactly what the movie is going to be about. You know what kind of movie it is, and you know what to expect from it. We go into a movie knowing what to get because the trailer has warned us. It's told us everything about the genre. Well, what happens if the trailer doesn't do that? If it gives us something else entirely? Well, let's take a look at something here.
Can you fly a cruiser like this?
You mean, do I know how to land what's left of this thing?
Well,
Under the circumstances, I'd say the ability to pilot this thing is irrelevant. Strap yourselves in.
another happy landing.
Anakin, I'm appointing you to be my personal representative on the Jedi Council.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What?
General Grievous has escaped once again.
We have a job to do, Anakin. Try not to upset him.
General Grievous. You're shorter than I expected.
Jedi scum.
So uncivilized.
Hiding in the Outer Rim, Grievous is. We've been waiting for you.
I sense a trap.
Hands up, Jedi.
Next move?
Spring the trap. Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
I say patience.
Patience.
R2 will be along in a few moments, and then he'll release the rations.
Hello there.
Oh no.
We got him, R2.
Flying is for droids.
This is where the fun begins.
Don't move.
Do you have a plan B?
Let's take a look at another example.
I can make the bad guys good for a weekend. So it's gonna be forever, or it's gonna go down in flames. You can tell me when it's over, if the high was worth the pain. Got a long list of ex-lovers, they'll tell you I'm insane. 'Cause you know I love the players, and you love the game. 'Cause we're young and we're reckless, we'll take this.
Obviously, you know Taylor Swift. This was part of her transition into a pop icon in 2014. There's a really famous collection that's put out almost every year called Punk Goes Pop.
A blank space, baby. It's all right, sure.
This is a collection of cover songs, heavy metal and punk bands of contemporary pop songs. Here's I Prevail doing Taylor Swift's Blank Space.
Is yet to come. Oh no! Screaming, crying, perfect storms. Like to make all the tables turn. Rose garden filled with thorns. Keep you second guessing like, oh my god, who is he? Who is he?
And then, of course, somebody came and made this monstrosity.
I'm a nightmare dressed like a daydream. So it's gonna be forever, or it's gonna go down in flames. You can tell me when it's over, if the high was worth the pain. Got a long list of ex-lovers, they'll tell you I'm insane. 'Cause you know I love the players, and you love the game. 'Cause we're young.
So you can see in that last video, purpose, genre, and audience are all wrapped up in each other. A different purpose makes for a different audience. A different genre makes for a different purpose and a different audience. These things all interact with each other, and if we change one, we have to acknowledge a change in the other as well. Let's consider audience, right? Who's Tay-Tay's audience in this? Recently dumped angsty teenage girls. On the other hand, I Prevail, who's their audience? Probably very angry middle-class suburban white dudes. Very different audiences in both of these things, and the genre reflects that audience. Let's look at purpose next. Taylor's purpose is to express a kind of sadness. Oh, I got dumped. That's sad. I Prevail's purpose is to express maybe something else, maybe to express anger. The genre is all we need to see the difference in that expression. There's maybe something more in that second cover to express, I don't know, mockery or something like that. Let's look at something that we're going to be even more familiar with in the course of this text. Let's think about Star Wars. Star Wars is a film, a set of films, and as a set of films, it also has a genre. On the one hand, it's science fiction. There are certain markers of a science fiction film that we become familiar with. It's set in deep space or on distant planets out in the cosmos. There's an overriding concern with technology and the uses of technology. There are alien species all over the place. Star Wars is rife with political metaphors. This is what science fiction is always very good at. On the other hand, Star Wars is also a fantasy. It's not just set in space, it's got a mythic structure to it. It's not just technology we have, it's also magic and sorcery. It's not just alien species, but these species are also considered to be, we might say, fabulous, the thing we find in fables, talking animals and other kinds of creatures. Not just political metaphors, but philosophical and religious explorations of grand ideas, things like good and evil. This is often not something we find in science fiction, but we find all the time in fantasy. Star Wars straddles two genres. That means it's setting expectations for two sets of audiences. One audience is looking for science fiction, one audience looking for fantasy. It has to fulfill both of those expectations in order for it to be successful, which means it has to employ two sets of conventions. Let's have a look at our open form essay, Major Assignment 1, along the lines of this rhetorical triangle. First, the purpose. The purpose is to explore. The purpose is to discover. You're not trying to prove anything here. You're not trying to argue anything for anyone. This assignment is designed to be something for you to figure out. What question do you have? It's better if you ask a genuine question, something you really do want to find out. Second, the audience. You might consider the audience for this one to be fans or casual viewers of Star Wars, people who have already seen this before. You don't need to explain what Star Wars is. You don't need to talk about the entire plot. You can assume that whoever's reading this, your audience, is already familiar with those things. The language for this is non-academic or non-formal. You can use colloquial speech in this. You don't have to be stuffy or uptight. This is a more open-ended kind of essay. You might think of your audience here as a bunch of nerds. Look, nerds are really into arguing about things that happen in films. They're really into looking at the details of films to support their positions. Imagine you're writing for people who have seen Star Wars enough times to know what the details are and can find out more information about what those details specifically mean. Sometimes it helps when you're imagining your audience to think about where it might be published. Maybe you can think of this as being something that could be published online somewhere in some sort of pop culture magazine or blog or something like that. Some of the things that we'll read as examples have been published in those sites, and it might be a chance for you to think about where something like this would appear. Third, the genre. This is an open form essay, as I've already said. There's a few features, a few conventions to open form essays. One of those is having more informal speech. Another, and this is key, beginning the introduction with a question. You start with something you seek to answer. This is very different from a traditional essay where you start with a thesis that you will then defend. You're starting with a question that you want to have answered. You must have a question early on in the essay. The body of the paper is then spent trying to answer that question. Oftentimes it breaks it down to multiple parts. Sometimes it complicates the question. Sometimes it'll give definitions for the key terms that it's going to use, or it'll explain some of the criteria that it's set up. Finally, a conclusion. This is also key. If you begin with a question and your body analyzes the question, your conclusion must come to an answer. Now, however you answer this question is entirely up to you. Again, the point of this assignment is for you to explore something. It might be that the answer you come to is kind of a non-answer. Sometimes those are the best answers. We find that the question we started with turns out to be far more complicated than we would have thought. If your answer to the question you come to is, heck, it's complicated, that's fine. That's an answer to a question, and that's okay. The most important thing, though, is that you come to a conclusion, some kind of a conclusion, even if that conclusion is provisional.